Thank you for joining us today as we go over the governance changes for TAPPS for the 22-23 school year. As we begin the TAPPS school year on August 1st, we're all looking forward to a great year, but there are some changes that you need to be aware of. So we're going to walk through some basic eligibility rules to help everybody get back on track and get started for the new year. We're going to start with the TAPPS Constitution and the basic eligibility rules. Robert, why don't you walk through those first 5 or 6 things there that are the basic eligibility rules for all students in TAPPS?
Thank you, Bryan. Welcome, everyone. Our core eligibility, core tenets that have been in our Constitution for many years now. Basic eligibility in TAPPS. You can't turn 19 before September 1 of the current school year. You're only allowed 4 years in high school. You cannot be a high school graduate. You need to be a full-time day student. We'll talk about that more in a little detail in a minute. And then there are obviously no pass, no play rules that every participant needs to be in compliance with.
So those rules are in our TAPPS Constitution. They're also in our bylaws. And to point being, they're not subject to appeal. So as we walk through these things, hope it just gives you a little more insight. And as we go forward, make sure we're all in compliance. So the first one that comes up is 19 before September 1st of this current school year. If they're 19 prior to September 1, they will not be eligible for the current school year. An amendment proposal was presented to the TAPPS membership over the summer, beginning in our convention, and we took our votes. Robert, what was the outcome of that amendment proposal and the voting election?
So the amendment proposal submitted to membership was that we have institute a waiver or review process for those students that might turn 19 before September 1. We followed the governance in our Constitution about how that's submitted to our membership. That would have required a 2/3 vote of our member schools to make a change to the Constitution. We allowed basically the whole month of June for those votes to be cast, and when that was completed, there were not enough. We sent an email out to our membership with the exact tally on those, but it did not get close to the 2/3 membership required. So that rule will not change. And more importantly, the rule about those eligibility things into Constitution not being appealable is still in force.
So we thank everybody that participated in that process. It's always good to be a member and always be a part of the voting opportunity. As we move to 4 years in high school, that remains the same from the day they enter and begin the 9th grade. That first day of the 9th grade, they have 4 consecutive years. So it's not how many years you played or participated, it's how many years you have in high school. So if you repeat a grade in high school, you're going to lose your senior year. So regardless of why, and we've had a lot of discussion over the years about that, but that's not appealable. A full-time day student means you're taking at least 4 classes at the member school towards graduation from the member school. Robert, talk just a little bit about the difference between just taking 4 classes and looking to graduate from school. That's come up a couple of times here in the last couple of years.
It comes up occasionally. Certainly we've had more questions in this respect as we navigated COVID the last couple of years. We had a lot more virtual instruction at our schools than we've ever had in the past. Some wanted to continue that fully virtual instruction, which means they would not fall under the definition of a full-time day student. And then the other one that applies is homeschool students. We do have homeschool students that come to our member schools, and in some instances they don't really intend to take a full load or to graduate from our member school. They still want to graduate from their homeschool program. They just want to take some courses at one of our member schools, and that would not be in compliance with being a full-time day student. That's outlined fairly specifically in Section 82 that addresses those particular topics, but they do need to be a full-time day student at our member school, taking at least 4 classes. Those are defined in detail in that section, and they must be intending to graduate from that member school.
So that's what's in place. That's what's been in place. Now let's look a little bit about the changes that have come about over the summer. Our athletic executive committee, our fine art groups, and our board has approved the following changes. So Section 80, in numerical order, would be the first one up. That's students who do not live with their parents. So students that do not live with their biological parents or adoptive parents, they must fill out the paperwork prior to being approved for participation in TAPPS. So the basics there is they have to fill out the paperwork. In the past, if you were not living with your grandparents, your aunt or your uncle, your brother or sister, those first-degree relatives, then you would be ineligible over the course of the first year at the new school. Robert, talk a little bit about the change that has come about here and how that you see that affecting things.
So the process is still the same. If you are a student not living with your parents, you still need to fill out the application and submit it to the TAPPS office. The change that's in effect going forward is you no longer are required to sit a year of participation if you do not live with one of those immediate relatives. So you could be approved if you don't live with one of those immediate relatives in the future, but you still have to go through the application process. We still do need to look at who you're living with and what those circumstances are. And if going through that process, everything looks in order, there is an option that you could be approved for immediate eligibility.
I think the big thing that I'm hearing as we went through these discussions, Robert, was that it's not an automatic no. You do have a chance to be eligible immediately once the paperwork's done and TAPPS makes the approval. Is that a good way of saying that?
That's correct. We still need the information. We still need to understand the living situation. And then once we walk through that, look at it, ask any questions. If everything looks in order, there is a possibility that you could gain immediate eligibility.
Moving on to Section 102, international students, the same thing kind of applies there. If you were an international student, which means you are not a citizen of the United States, then you had to sit a year your first year at the TAPPS high school. So, Robert, how does that same rule apply here?
So our international students still have to go through the application process just like they have in the past. And as Bryan mentioned, if you were not a U.S. citizen, you were what we define as an international student. If you lived with your parents, if your parents would say were transferred here for a job or something like that, you could gain immediate eligibility. If you did not live with your parents or one of those close relatives like we talked about previously, then you would sit a year from varsity competition. That requirement to sit a year is not necessarily an obstacle in the future, but we still need to know your living arrangements, who you're living with, who your guardian is in that situation. We do need to look at that, ask any questions, see if there are any other eligibilities issues that might arise in that process. And there is that opportunity now to gain immediate eligibility.
So for both Section 80, students not living with parents, and Section 102, the big thing here is going to be have the students get their information into the Rank 1 student profile. If they answer that they are not living with their parents, or if they answer that they're not a U.S. citizen, that will prompt them that they have to complete the appropriate forms, and then we can begin the process of gathering the information, approving. So it is not a quick step. That is not a long step. If we have all the information, that review usually goes pretty quick. It's the thing that seems to drag it out, Robert, is the failure to get all the documentation we've asked for. Is that a fair statement?
There's a lot of documentation required. There are several different categories of international students. We have exchange students, we have boarding school students, we have a lot of different students that fall into that category. We do need that information. We need transcripts. We need to know when they entered high school in their previous country. We need documentation from the government, whether it's a F1, a J1, whatever Homeland Security requires for them to be in the country. We need that information and review it before we can make a decision.
So the process hasn't changed. It's just the fact that upon completion of the process, they may gain immediate eligibility as opposed to having to wait a year. The other thing that is big is that one of the rules that was in Section 102 for many years was the participation on international teams and representing their country for international students. So being in FIBA, whether it be a golf or whether it be tennis or whether it be something else, if they participated on the national team, received national team instruction, that student would not be eligible in that activity in TAPPS for the entirety of their high school career. Robert, how has that changed based on the recent voting?
So based on the recent review by the board, which they've looked at for many years now, as Bryan mentioned, those students were prohibited from participation in TAPPS for any of their high school career. That's going to change. We don't have all that detailed here on this PowerPoint, but we do have information coming out to our schools in writing on all these changes, so be looking for that. The big change is going to be this. There is an opportunity for these students that are international students that represented their own country in international competition or received that training, there is an opportunity for them to ultimately gain eligibility in TAPPS. They still will be required to sit for 1 year before they can participate. But after that 1 year sit out, the school will then be able to petition and request a waiver for that student to be able to participate going forward. The school will only be allowed one waiver per year that would encompass an international student who has participated and represented their country.
So, Robert, really what I'm hearing, and I think the intent of the board and the AEC when they made this decision was it's not an automatic no, but there's an opportunity for a yes. So I think that's the big key here is it's not just a, hey, no, you're done for 4 years or whatever it happens to be. You still have to sit out a year. It's the only sit out now for student not living with parent or Section 102 for the most part would be if you had participated on an international team. But after that, there is an avenue or an opportunity to make appeals. Is that in keeping with your thoughts?
There are some hoops you have to jump through, but there is opportunity for those students to ultimately gain eligibility to participate in TAPPS.
So I think the biggest changes I think we're going to see are coming in Section 104, which is your transfer students. So those are high school transfer students. And as we look at that, the next thing would be that this encourages all levels of competition. In the past, it really governed varsity competition, and now it governs both sub-varsity and varsity competition. So if you're a high school student and you're transferring to a TAPPS school, participation is the big opportunity. They're coming to participate. They want to play in an activity, but the rules have changed a little bit now to probably bring us more in line with where we always wanted to be. We just didn't have the opportunity. So as we go to participation, Robert, what is the big change in participation based on the new rule?
So the big change in participation is going to be this. Next slide. The transfer student process must be completed and approved by TAPPS prior to any interscholastic competition. This includes scrimmages. This includes all games where there's a tournament, non-district, district, postseason. In other words, the big change will be this. In the past, a transfer student could have their paperwork in process. They could still participate at the sub-varsity level until they were finally approved and then eligible for varsity participation. That rule is now changed. They will not be allowed to participate in a scrimmage or contest at any level until they have been fully and finally approved and the process is complete.
So the student can practice with the team, they can be in off season, but before they participate against another school, again, we'll go back and reiterate, a scrimmage, a tournament, a non-district game, district or postseason, they have to be approved and be approved by the TAPPS office with a date of approval, and the district has to have the opportunity to look at it. So again, transfer forms, we got to get them in, and we got to get them in. So we are sitting here at the end of July. We've received 375 transfer forms. A lot of them aren't complete. So just getting the form in or just concluding the student acknowledgement of rules or the student information page, you still have to get the PAPF if it's required. So again, make sure all the documentation is there. As the school administrator, make sure that you're looking at the students in rank 1 to know if it's required. Did they answer something that says they need a PAPF? Can't encourage you enough. Robert, is that a good way to say it?
We need to get the paperwork in quickly. We will process it quickly. We'll get it out to the district. We will have a quick turnaround, even though we get hundreds and hundreds of these the first few weeks of the year. We will get them out there, but the emphasis is going to be on you at the school level to make sure you're tracking these, make sure your parents are getting their part done. If you need things from the previous school, be very proactive in getting that done. Part of the reason behind this is we've had some schools in the past who thought everything was done, thought everything was good, and ended up that everything hadn't been done, not all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and they kind of inadvertently fell into some penalties and violations that really allowing the kids to participate at some level but not the varsity level got confusing, and it really caused some people to get caught up in the rule that weren't intending to break the rule, but there were very harsh consequences. We're trying to help protect you from those things and make sure everything's done.
You mentioned harsh consequences. It goes back to Article 7 of the Constitution. If you haven't established a student's eligibility, if they haven't been approved and they play in a varsity game, you're forfeiting that game. Same would be true of a sub-varsity game. It just wouldn't have near as big an impact on the postseason. So, again, it's a harsh penalty, forfeiture, a contest, etc. So make sure you get them in. Make sure you get your forms in. We'll talk a little bit more about forms, but this is how you establish the eligibility for a transfer student. This is one part of that process. Another big thing that's been talked about over the years is follow the coach. Basically, that rule has developed over the years. If you had played for a coach at a club or played for it at a previous school, and then you transfer over within 12 months, then you're ineligible in that sport. So there's some things that have changed, but one of the things that was added after that original was that if the coach was a manager, director, owner, somebody in leadership at a club level, that was also added. So the coach at your school could be the owner or manager of a club and never touch the kid in question, but because they were on the same club level, they were in the same club, the student would be ineligible at your school. Robert, talk a little bit about how that's changed and how you see that moving forward.
So as Bryan mentioned, if you go to Section 104, you look at that section that talks about follow the coach. It doesn't say it specifically in those words. That's just what everybody knows it as, and that's what we've called it over the years. There were those two prohibitions that affected student eligibility. If you coached that student directly, or if you managed, were director or owner of a club. That manager, director, owner portion of the rule has now been eliminated. So what we're looking at for a transfer student to determine if they followed the coach really now relates to only direct coaching of that student. We'll talk in a minute about 136. Similar language has been removed there as well.
I think it gives you an opportunity to coach in the club world, the select world, the AAU world. It gives you a chance to coach for your coaches to go earn some money and be a part of that and not penalize the student who also wants to be a part of that same club. And I think the biggest driving factor here was in some areas there's only one club. So if there was only one club and now you're a part of that club, losing your high school eligibility or you losing the coach, that's a pretty big penalty. So I applaud the board. I applaud the AEC for doing that. Robert?
This has been discussed many, many times over the last several years. We've had a lot of discussions with our ADs, the challenges that this brings to hiring and keeping good coaches, and how even trying to stay within the rule, something might change at the club level. That didn't get communicated to the school, and now we have some, for lack of a better description, some unintentional violations that caught some people over the years. And the board, the AEC, have looked at this and believe removing this obstacle will assist our schools.
I also think it's going to open up some personnel opportunities, folks that you might have had to say no to before, especially in this time period when, well, it's hard to find teachers. And then to go ahead and find club coaches or find coaches. Obviously, you want the best instructors possible in the activity, so I think it's going to be a help. Robert, the transfer deadlines really haven't changed. Those have been in place. We are a little different from other organizations. We do have those. So I think the three that are everybody should know are the fall transfer deadline, the winter transfer deadline, and the spring transfer deadline. So if you're not there by that deadline, by September 6th, then playing football, playing cross country, playing volleyball or fall soccer, you can't play at the varsity level. So to your admissions departments and to those that are bringing kids to you, make sure that they know those deadlines. But, Robert, we did change the transfer deadline. The transfer deadline originally was August the 15th when we first instituted this rule a couple of years ago. So talk to us a little bit about what that September 6th deadline means for seniors in all activities, not just fall sports.
So we did change for the first time. Our senior transfer deadline, we've now moved a little bit later. We've moved it to coincide with that fall transfer deadline. I think that makes it less confusing for our schools. I think it gives everybody a hard date they can look at, and that seniors are not treated any differently than any other student when it comes to transferring at the beginning of the year. But do remember, for senior transfers, this deadline, they need to be enrolled and attending withdrawn from the previous school in your school prior to that September 6th deadline to be eligible for any activities throughout the entire school year. And keep that in mind, that senior transfer deadline, while it has been moved and there is a little more time there for seniors to transfer to your school, that's a hard deadline that would prohibit them from participating the entire year.
So go back to your requirements. I'm just going to repeat them. If I get them wrong, jump in and correct me. You have to be enrolled in the new school, you have to be attending the new school, and you have to be withdrawn from the old school. So this isn't going to happen just overnight. You've got 2 or 3 steps to make. So they could be withdrawn from the old school, enrolled, and attending on September 6th. You can be attending if you're on September 6th, you've made that requirement. September 7th, you're a day late. Is that the way you see that?
That is correct. And if you look at your calendar in the fall, we picked that date. That's that Tuesday after Labor Day. We know Labor Day is a holiday. If a family walks in that week before, they want to get in, then if you think that student is a good student, good fit for your school, you want to get them in, you need to let your admissions people know, your registrar people know. If you're going to get that student in and get in under that deadline, you need to make sure they're sitting in a class withdrawn from the previous school, enrolled and ready to go on that September 6th deadline.
So as we go back, just to kind of recap the transfer process, I think the big thing to understand is they're not eligible for interscholastic competition until approved by the TAPPS office. They can practice with the teams, practice in off-season during the process of getting them approved, but they may not participate in scrimmages, tournaments, individual games at the varsity or starting this year, the sub-varsity level. So that is a big change. If you have questions, please reach out to us at info at TAPPS, TAPPS.biz. We'll definitely try to help walk you through that process. Section 135 has been important, especially in this transfer process in establishing student eligibility. So it does outline the requirements that you have your student roster, that you have all your paperwork in, that you're ready to rock and roll in rank 1. It says in our database. Our database is rank 1. Robert, what's the change in penalties that we've had?
So Section 135, if you go through and read it, it basically goes through all the things you have to do to establish student eligibility to be able to participate. It goes through the forms that are necessary. With regard to the penalties, as Bryan mentioned earlier, playing a student that is not eligible, an ineligible student, the Constitution dictates that would be a forfeiture of games. In those situations, our executive board has reviewed that. There was a section in there that talked about inadvertent errors or mistakes in paperwork. That has now been removed from that section. It allowed the district to look at that and determine that if that situation occurs, those things are going to be reviewed by our executive board in the future. And that language regarding the option to do things short of forfeiture has now been removed. Those will be reviewed by our executive board. Hopefully they don't occur, but if they do, the board's going to take the lead in reviewing those situations.
I think the biggest thing is the district in any sanctioning opportunity for violation of rules, it goes farther than 135. The district can recommend a coach be withheld eligibility to participate, or a student's eligibility or forfeiture game. It's the board that will actually have to approve that recommendation. So the district would recommend, the board would then have the ability to approve or change. But in this situation, it's going to be pretty hard in 135. That inadvertent error is kind of taken out. So the onus is on the school and school personnel to make sure rank 1 is up to date, all your paperwork's in, and we're ready to go. As we move to section 136, there's a lot of things in there, in season, off season, during season, but we're going to talk about off season here for just a minute. So off season practice, the old rule was that if you had it in the school day, nothing changes. You get that 1 hour or 1 period a day. That period can't be any longer than any of the others. But out of the school day, the off season practice, if you did not have a class called athletics and you're doing it outside the school day, that class had to happen immediately before or immediately after the school day. So it's probably starting at 7 or 7:30, or it's starting at 3:30 and ending at 4:30. But Robert, we've made a big change, or I think we've made a big change, and I think that this will help. I think the board and the AUC listen to our folks, especially with their part-time coaches or stipend coaches that maybe couldn't get there at 7 o'clock in the morning. They had a real job that they were earning a living, or they couldn't get there immediately after school. So Robert, what is the changes you see in off-season practice?
So the change in off-season practice, as Bryan mentioned, the amount of time that what we say 1 hour a day or something equivalent to your class period, that doesn't change. What does change is there's no longer a requirement that off-season period immediately abut the school day. So it doesn't have to be the 1 hour prior to the start of your school day. It doesn't have to be the 1 hour immediately after your school day. This is in response to a lot of discussions we've had with our member schools over the years. Bryan mentioned maybe a coach that's a part-time coach that can't get there during that time. A lot of our schools have struggles with the facilities they have available, amount of gym space or gym time, and shuffling a large number of kids or program through there. So we are allowing some flexibility for our member schools to determine that time when they're going to hold that period. And once again, it does not have to be immediately before or after the school day. Perfect example, your school day ends at 3:30. That 1 hour period wouldn't have to be now from 3:30 to 4:30. It could be from 4:30 to 5:30 or something similar to that.
I think we're going back to what the words would be: local control. As long as your school agrees that that's okay for those students to stay and come back at 4:30 or 5:30, then that can be the process. So again, this is for off-season practice. We think it gives some opportunity. It also, you can give guided instructions, so it doesn't have to be an open gym now that later at night. You can actually give the guided instruction, so I think that's very important. The next thing about off-season coaching that changes now is pretty much the same rule as what we talked about. The follow the coach is at the present time, and for 21-22, if you were the manager, director, or owner and you were a school employee, then those kids couldn't be in your program as high school students. So we'll jump us to the next one. Robert, walk through just a little bit about how that rule is going to change, just like you did for transfer students.
So 136, if you've looked at it, you know it's a very long section. If you scroll down to Roman numeral 4, talking about coaching restrictions, it talks about off-season participation, what the students could do, and then what role the coaches can play during off-season. So for high school students, it's talking about school employees, participation in the club, select or AAU. We, as we mentioned earlier in that follow the coach, the restriction of owning a club, being a director or manager of a club during the off season, the past rule says you couldn't do that if high school students were a part of that club. That owner, manager, director language has now been removed. So a coach at your school could still own, manage, or direct a club. Students at your school could participate in that club, but they cannot be coached directly by that coach at your school.
So the change does not affect direct coaching. So if you're a volleyball coach and you've got high school students from your school, I don't care, you could be the registrar and still be a coach in a club world. You cannot coach students from your school after the end of the volleyball season through the end of the school year. But at the end of the school year, you could coach them during the summer. Obviously, you've already missed the club season. So the rule about coaching your students hasn't changed. It's the ownership, the managing, or the directorship, or whatever name or title the club may have given the person. So that has changed, and it's the same basic premise as follow the coach in transfer rule. So again, if you have questions on that one, info, INFO at TAPPS.biz, INFO at TAPPS.biz, or give us a call at the TAPPS office, and we'll help walk you through. However, if you're going to ask questions, please don't make them generic. Make sure you're saying who it is, what they do, and where they're playing, and the club, etc. So we don't do real good on generalities, but we can sure help you when it comes to specifics. Robert, talk to me a little bit about Section 138. We've had the official ball now for many years. We have transferred to Baden for the non-football sports, and we are at Big Game USA team issue for all other sports. That is available if you go to www.tapps.biz, click on athletics, and click on official balls. Well, if you'll bounce us over to the website real quick, we're going to go to www.tapps.biz. We're going to click on athletics up there on the top line, and then right up there in red, blue on the right-hand side says approved balls. We'll click on that, and it'll just show you there are the approved balls. So, Robert, talk to us a little bit about what that's going to mean and in the future as far as this transference from Wilson for everything to now Big Game USA and Baden. What happens if we use them? What happens if we don't? Give us a little idea about non-compliance.
So we do have an official ball. We've had it for many years. We do that for consistency with regard to the games that are played with our member schools, that everybody has an expectation of the same ball being used in competition. And it is something that we also have partnerships with these particular companies to support us in that endeavor. We do know that people have opinion about balls, the ones they've used forever, the ones they like. We do understand that. All these balls made by these manufacturers are very good quality. They're there to help you and serve you. This change was made a year in advance in respect of our schools, and we know what you have to do with regard to your budget items and preparing for next year. Last fall, the decision was made to move to Baden and Big Game, and we started getting information out to our schools about that. We brought these representatives to our all-state meetings. They were at our convention. So we have tried to communicate early and often about the official balls changing and get that information out there to you. We do get this question from time to time. Well, what happens if I don't use it? What happens if I like my old ball and I just don't use it? We don't like to have those discussions, but there will be penalties for noncompliance, and penalties will not include forfeiture of games. So if you have a game and the other team didn't use the correct ball, don't call our office and say, hey, they didn't use the right ball. Here's a picture. Can I get a forfeiture of game? That does not happen in these instances. Similar with uniforms and those kind of violations, we'll deal with that. But this has been reviewed, and it's been determined that the penalties for a first violation would be a reprimand to the coach, $150 fine for the first game, and then obviously if we have subsequent issues or concerns with that, those penalties would escalate for subsequent violations.
So, Robert, other than football, because I use my own ball when I'm on offense in football, if I have the correct ball but my host is not using the correct ball, it's my understanding I can then make that presentation to the official in charge and say, hey, we need to be using the official ball, which is Baden, and I have those. If they can't produce those, then they should be using my ball. Is that the way you see that, or am I misinterpreting that?
You are correct. The correct official ball should be used in all games, and if that means the visiting team has to provide it, then that's what should occur.
So I think we're giving you an option there to get on with the game and make sure we're doing the right thing. So, again, official balls have changed, but that's been out there for a while. If you haven't got them, you need to get them. It's time to be moving forward on that. And that includes all games that your team is the home team or you participate as a tournament host. So, for non-district games that you host, you should be using Baden. Or in any football game you're in, scrimmage or otherwise, if it's an interscholastic contest, you should be using the official ball at TAPPS. We're going to move on now to Rank 1. Rank 1 is our database and the requirements, and some things have really changed there, Robert, I think, as far as trying to get compliance to help our schools. Sometimes it helps if there's a penalty on the back end. Sometimes you can lead the horse to the water and he drinks anyway, but sometimes you got to have a little penalty on the back end. So, again, the Rank 1 basics, you've got to have your student profiles and your coach profile. Your information needs to be in there. It needs to be accurate. In both instances, there's an acknowledgement of rules that you go through and you sign, especially on the scope side for the coaches. And then if a physical is required on the student side, that needs to be there. The physical is important as far as protecting both the student, the family, and the school. So if it's a requirement, and it is, make sure you have that and it's uploaded. Again, for the physical, we don't actually see the physical here in the TAPPS office. That's between your staff and the family. However, moving to the school forms, each activity we need to have a student eligibility roster, and that needs to be in prior to your first scrimmage or game. You can always add students to it, but we need that initial eligibility roster. What does that term actually mean, Robert? In Rank 1, the eligibility roster, who are we looking to be on it and why?
So if you are in a particular sport or activity, all your students should be in Rank 1. You need to create a roster for that sport or activity. We're coming up on the fall season. So, for instance, volleyball, you need a volleyball roster. And what you do, you go into Rank 1. You create that roster, and then you pull those students over onto that roster and put them on your volleyball roster. Like Bryan mentioned, you can add students throughout the year if that were necessary, but as you pull them over on that roster into rank 1, they're either going to be red or green. If they're red, that means something is missing eligibility-wise. If they're green, that means rank 1 has picked up every form that would be required for that student, and it's been done and it's been completed. If they're red, they should not be participating, and we need those eligibility rosters done, started, in motion before you play that first scrimmage or game.
I think the misconception in the past was that was only varsity players. This is for any student in high school. So if it's volleyball, it's 9th through 12th grade, regardless of what team they're on, football, cross country. If you've got a cross country and you've got 25 runners that are going to go to meet, they all need to be on that cross country. That might not be the 7 you enter in the meet, but all 25 would need to be on there. And then when we look at schedules, Robert, I think that's the most common thing we get the call is so-and-so hadn't put their schedule in or so-and-so hadn't put their score in. And I think over the years it's just become that thorn that's now become a post that we're going to deal with. So what is required about schedules? What do we require in rank 1, and what do you see as the importance of that?
So the schedules for your teams need to be entered in rank 1. You need to go in there. You need to put that information in there. Our office can assist. If you need help, Rank 1 can assist. They have great tutorials on how to do this. It's not really hard. They need to be put in there, and they need to be made public, not private. When they're made public, they can be seen. If they're private, they can't be seen. They're really not out there. That needs to be done for all the team sports, and that needs to be done as well prior to your first interscholastic contest, scrimmage, or game. Obviously, there could be changes to your schedule throughout the season. You could go in and make those changes, but we need that eligibility roster done from the very beginning. Even if you make changes later, we need those schedules entered and made public at the very beginning of the season before you start scrimmages or games.
I think, Robert, obviously the easy one is football. You're playing 10 games in 11 weeks. You put the 10 games in there. For volleyball, especially coming up here in volleyball, but it would be true of any of the other sports. If I go to a tournament, do I have to put all those games in there, or can I just leave those off because I'm in a tournament?
They need to all be in there.
And so that there is the opportunity, especially in volleyball, that you could have a win, 2-0. You could have a loss, 0-2, especially in pool play games. They do count. Or you could have a tie at 1-1, especially along that line. So all games matter. All games need to be in, especially if you're in a tournament. And it will take you a couple of extra minutes, and we appreciate all that effort that you're putting in so that we can advertise everything that our schools are doing. The next thing that I guess if we weren't getting calls about schedules, we're getting calls about scores. So we'll jump on over to score reporting when you're there. Robert, talk to us a little bit about score reporting and what we anticipate.
So the obligation to report your scores is not new. It's been there forever. We need that information in the database. That information needs to be available to everyone out there. It populates to the standings, which everyone needs to be able to see. In the past, some of our schools have been more diligent than others. I'll say that nicely. And in the past, I think a lot of people don't report scores or not diligent in reporting because they really don't want other people out there to know that information. Well, those days are over, okay? There's so much out there now on everyone. They can find your scores. They can find the result of your game. The idea that I need to hide something is not a part of what we need to do going forward. So we are going to reinforce our rules with regard to score reporting. It needs to be done for all games. That's tournament, non-district, district, and postseason. And there is a deadline. This deadline's been out there forever. It's not a hard deadline. Within 48 hours of the completion of that game, where there's single games, tournament, playoff games, we need those scores reported in rank 1. That's what we need.
I think the importance there is that we want everybody to know how you did. You want everybody to know how you did. So let's get the scores in and make it public. Once you put that score in, make it public. So the other side of that, we've walked through a couple of years now. We've had Scoreboard out there. I think that they've worked through a lot of bugs. I think you can put them in either way, and we'll have instructions on Scoreboard or Rank 1. What I can tell you right now is it works in Rank 1. So if you want to stay in compliance and make sure you're in compliance, Rank 1 is the way to move forward and make sure that's all in there. As we move forward, though, if we're going to have this requirement, and we've had it for years, but there's never really been a lot of teeth in this, and I think the Athletic Executive Committee and the board have listened to the membership across the state, remembering that you could have somebody in Amarillo and Lubbock in the Final Four playing somebody, down from the Houston area. You don't get to see each other every day. So the reporting of scores is a huge importance to us. So, Robert, as we flip to that next screen, what kind of penalties are we looking at if the student eligibility roster is not in prior to that first game, the schedules aren't in turned public, the scores aren't in turned public? What are we going to be looking at as far as possible sanctions?
So, with regard to score reporting, after one game in football or 2 games in all the other team sports, obviously football only plays 10 games, the other sports play many more games than that. They play 2 or 3 games a week, so there's a little different time frame there. But after one game in football or 2 games in all the other team sports, first offense, a warning will be issued. You didn't get your score in on time. We've got 2 scores here you haven't reported. Whatever the issue is, you'll be given a warning. If there is a subsequent failure after that warning to report scores timely, it will result in a 1-game suspension for the head coach. When we're talking about failure to get your eligibility roster in by the deadline and your schedules in Rank 1 and made public so they're viewable by everyone, it will result in similar penalties.
I think the big thing is if you're having trouble getting them in, please call, let us know, and let us help you walk through. If something occurs in your daily life or in your school life and something can't happen, let us know that. We're here to walk a path with you. But we're not going to be going down the road and 2 months into a season, your record is 0-0, yet on Max Preps or some other format, or even on your own school website, you're showing yourself as 12-1. So score reporting is important. Schedules are important. Personnel rosters are important. They've always been important. Now there's penalties associated with it. And if you are, like you said, failure to have that eligibility or failure to have any of this is a 1-game suspension for the coach. But the idea is you've corrected that behavior. I would hate to say that it happens again after that, because I do see the penalties perhaps escalating as the AEC and the executive board would look at it. So to wrap this up and just to give you an idea, we feel like here in the office that we've given some loosening to some rules and we've tightened a couple of others up. It's important that we know the rules and that we move forward. It's important that you know the rules and move forward. So again, if you have questions or concerns, it's a whole lot better to ask permission than ask for forgiveness. It's a whole lot better to ask and be educated than to be, for lack of a better word, ignorant of a rule. So it's your job to know the rules as an athletic director, as a coach, and those things that pertain to your team and to the students you're coaching. So info at TAPPS.biz. Our phone number is 254-947-9268. All this information that we're discussing is available at www.tapps.biz, www.tapps.biz. Up in the top left-hand corner of that website, you'll see a little thing that says bylaws. If you click on bylaws, it takes you to a very long Google Doc, but you can search back through there. These rules will be actually spelled out, and we will also be emailing along with this video. We will also have a recap, a written recap that goes with it. We appreciate you joining us today. We appreciate your efforts to learn the rules and the rule changes, and most importantly, thank you for all you do for the student athletes and the students of TAPPS. Everything that you do helps their dreams come true. Thank you again from the TAPPS office. If you need us, please reach out.